Unless you've been living under a rock, it is likely that you've heard of this watch. Indeed, I am talking about the Tudor Black Bay 58, often touted as the savior to those of us who can't get hold of a Rolex Submariner. It is not hard to see why, when you consider that the Black Bay 58 is not only a solid diver. Unlike the Rolex, you can actually get one with only a few months' wait. It also won't cost you an arm and a leg like its bigger sibling Rolex. And most important of all, this watch pays homage to the iconic Rolex and Tudor divers that came before it, but somehow manages to showcase enough unique design elements to stand on its own. For example, it boasts the MT5402 in-house movement that is unique to this watch and this watch alone. It must be the worst kept secret in the watch world that Tudor was founded by Hans Wilsdorf. By now you must have heard this 100 times. Yes, the same Hans Wilsdorf that founded Rolex just 38 years prior. So then, the logical conclusion is that you are getting Rolex quality at Tudor prices. It is indeed a tempting proposition, one that many have embraced. Publications and YouTubers alike are evangelizing the idea that this is a perfect watch. And although it is close to perfection, in my opinion, there are some flaws. So let's take a look at the 5 things you should know before buying one and how to potentially fix them. Let's ease into this by looking at the bezel, as it is objectively imperfect. With all this hype about aesthetics, it is sometimes easy to forget why the bezel rotates. The whole point of a rotating bezel is to keep track of how many minutes have elapsed. Your life will depend on it if you are a scuba diver, where a tank of oxygen will typically last between 20 to 50 minutes. Perhaps a more common and relatable use case is using the bezel as a Poorman's GMT. Regardless of what you use it for, it is fair to say that the operability of the bezel is important. This is where the Tudor Black Bay 58 falls short. The bezel is tight, and it is hard to find a good grip when the watch is only 39mm wide and does not have serrated edges like the Rolex Submariner. Now imagine having to do this underwater with rubber gloves up to 7mm thick. For this very reason, I would think twice before boasting about how the 58 is the perfect dive watch. Next is the size. 39mm is small for a diver. Really small, so make sure you try it on before putting down a deposit. It may be a decent fit for those of you with smaller wrists, but I can say from experience, most of us, at least here in Australia, have at least 8-inch wrists. The third issue I have with the Black Bay 58 is very much in the same spirit as the problems with the bezel. This watch sacrifices too much in the name of aesthetics. The riveted bracelet, for example, is just for show. Yes, they do look good, but they aren't actually holding anything together. The crown, positioned at 3 o'clock, does not have guards and could easily be unscrewed accidentally by a nearby shark when diving. These design choices are at the expense of functionality and pushes the Tudor towards the realm of fashion watches. There are ways to be beautiful and elegant whilst being functional and robust. More on that later. The last 2 things you should know about the Tudor Black Bay 58 are of the same ilk. First, no matter how much it pretends to be a vintage watch, it is not. And finally, no matter how much it wants to be a Rolex, well, it obviously isn't. Before you click away, hear me out. Just ask any true vintage watch collector why they love what they love. I'd wager you'll get something like this. Each vintage timepiece is unique and has its own history. It could be a piece with limited production, or perhaps the patina itself tells the story of how the watch was passed on from one generation to the next and eventually ended up on the subreddit r/watches. Each piece is special, unique and rare. This is something the Tudor Black Bay 58 cannot fake. At least not right now, when the model is barely 3 years old and still being churned out by Tudor. By that same token, the Tudor will never be a Rolex. Let's quote the man himself. On March 6, 1946, Hans Wilsdorf said this about Tudor.
For some years now I have been considering the idea of making a watch that our agents could sell at a more modest price than our Rolex watches.
To use a more modern analogy, it's like buying a Volkswagen Beetle and calling it a Porsche 911. Or buying a Swatch and pretending it is a Speedmaster. No matter how many times you tell yourself that the Black Bay 58 is unique and special, it will always be with the caveat that it's founded by the same guy who founded Rolex. So what now? Is it possible to fix these 5 flaws? The answer is yes. The logo itself could not be more fitting. This Seiko 5 offers 5 solutions to the Black Bay's 5 shortcomings. But before we jump in, let's talk about the elephant in the room. This isn't a vintage diver, so surely it cannot be a fair comparison. And that is a good point. And that is why we are going to do one better. The SKX009 is the predecessor of the SRPD Seiko 5 sports diver, and it is better in almost every way. But perhaps most importantly, it is a true vintage watch. Discontinued by Seiko but still holds nostalgic value in the hearts of true horologists. Let's see how the Seiko succeeds where the Tudor could not. First off, the bezel. Its deep serrated edges provide a secure hold for twists and turns. With the Tudor you may find yourself applying pressure on the surface of the bezel, but there is no such problem here. The transition from red to blue at the 20 minutes mark also makes for easy reading underwater. No need to worry about suffocating like the Tudor's hard-to-read bezel. The size helps too. It is a respectable 42mm watch. Still on the smaller side for people with average wrists, but respectable. 39mm dive watches like the Tudor are more catered to the ladies' market. Perfect if you are in that demographic, but I prefer the Seiko size myself. The third issue with the Black Bay 58 was functionality, and how too much has been sacrificed in the name of aesthetics. There are no such oversights with the SKX. To begin with, the crown is guarded and is offset to the 4 o'clock position where it is less likely to be adjusted accidentally. This level of attention to detail is the hallmark of a true watchmaker. We already spoke about the SRPD reissue of this vintage watch. I'll save that rant for another day, but the point is that this watch is a true, discontinued, vintage watch and not some mass-produced modern diver with a vintage veneer like the Tudor. Also, unlike the Tudor, the Seiko 5 brand has no bigger brother it is trying to be. And, yet, it is unique enough to stand on its own. For example, this watch features an in-house movement with patented technology. The 7S26 movement uses the magic lever system and only has 4 moving parts for winding, to maximize longevity. There have been other spin-off brands from Seiko to try capitalize on the glory of the parent brand. This is testament to the prestige of Seiko and of the SKX 009. To use another analogy, Tudor is to Rolex what Grand Seiko is to Seiko 5. None of that spring drive gimmick. Just get a quartz if you want a quartz. This Seiko is just pure quality and honest engineering. All of this for only 500 Aussie dollars. So do you still think the Tudor Black Bay 58 is perfection? Thank you so much for watching this video. If you've enjoyed it, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel.